it was solid, and this was kind of around the point where you'd get a ton of alternative controllers.
Yep.
And then, because like one of the next controllers we got was the 3DO controller.
Yes.
And 3DO's controller is weird because it's like the bastard child of a Super Nintendo and a Genesis controller. Because it's shaped like a Super Nintendo controller.
Yeah.
Has the shoulder buttons, but then it only has 3 face buttons, which makes it a bizarre controller for fighting games. To the point where there's actually like thousands of alternative 3DO controllers, including this one Capcom like fight controller, which is like super awkwardly shaped.
Well, and then one thing though that was interesting at the time too, wasn't it that a lot of the controllers had the same like controller plug? So a lot of them could
some
bounce
of them
around
did.
from because I know you could do that with Atari
Yes.
and the Sega.
So the Genesis controller had the same plugs as the Atari 2600 and the ColecoVision, and I believe the Atari 7800. So theoretically, you could take a Genesis controller and plug it into an Atari 2600, which is the way I recommend playing 2600, and it works. Like, everything it works exactly as you'd think, and it also works with the ColecoVision too.
Yep.
And it's funny. It's fascinating. Hey guys, I'm Bill, also known as the Barbecue Games on Instagram.
And I'm Alex, his sister, who brings only chaos.
And together we are the Gaming and Collecting Podcast, a mostly video game centered podcast.
But half the time, we just talk about anime.
And that collecting thing, well, that's mostly just an implication at best.
So come along and enjoy us on this adventure
as we discuss the games that shaped us. So, how you been?
Well, it's only been like maybe 5 hours since we last recorded.
I don't even think that.
I don't even think that, but it's been good. We went to the mall. I bought some Sailor Moon pants.
I bought manga.
You bought a manga?
We wandered around, we went to this wonderful store called Spencer Gifts, and we saw things we didn't need to see.
Yep. They have surprisingly a lot of anime things, though.
They do. I'll never forget my greatest off-topic from our actual topic, but I'll never forget one of the most cringy things I've ever seen.
What?
I was in a Spencer Gifts, and there's only 2 people in there. Well, besides I guess 3 counting the cashier, and not counting myself.
Yep.
I'm in there, and there's what appears to be a young mother flirting with the cashier as her daughter is in the background playing with a adult toy.
Oh, no.
Like a rocket ship.
Oh, no.
I saw that, and I just went, okay, I've had enough of the world today.
I've had enough of Spencer Gifts. I'm out of here.
I was like, oh, my. It's like
oh, my.
It's like they're completely oblivious to everything.
Yep. But we did that, and then we went to this place called BJ's.
Brewhouse.
It's like a brew house. And
we got salads.
We did. We got salads, but we got these avocado egg rolls. And they burnt the shit out of my mouth, but oh my god, they were so good.
They were very good.
They were actually better than the salad.
And we're still recovering from New Year's hangover right now, in case you're wondering when this was recorded.
New Year's tiredness and hangover. Probably going to bed relatively more early tonight, and we have to wake up more early tomorrow because Tillard is getting her nails did and getting a bath. Because I take my cat to get groomed.
Because doing it yourself would result in your face getting ripped off.
I can't. I don't know how they get her to do it. But with me, she's violent.
Violent.
Well, I think she knows that I'll eventually cave in and be like, I'm sorry. But they're like, they won't. Because they're on a mission. And their mission is to trim those nails.
Yep. So, it was eventful. Now we're back here.
No.
What are you drinking? This fine podcast.
I am drinking a Thomas Hooker Brewery CBD infused chill as F AF carefree seltzer. and mango flavored. It's pretty good. They like aren't super sweet or anything, but they have like a nice taste to them.
And I'm drinking a ranch water because I'm boring.
Yep, he put some ranch dressing in some water, swirled it around, and he gets so mad when I say that.
Because it's not funny. It wasn't funny the first time.
It'll always be funny to me.
Yeah, I know.
Ah, what was that? Was there your foot? Ugh. Snaggle toes. You can tell we're both tired.
Anyways, our topic for this episode is pretty simple, but also very intriguing.
Yeah.
Because we're going to be talking about the history of video game controllers.
Woo.
And video game controllers are fascinating.
Yeah.
They really are.
They've really evolved.
So I guess if we're going to go start from the beginning, we might as well start all the way back to what is often considered the first video game console, which was the Magnavox Odyssey. And the Magnavox Odyssey's controller is...
It's literally this white, like,
So it's
rectangle.
literally a box
Yep.
with a button on top. And then it has two knobs on each side, and one of the knobs has a third knob.
Yep. Oh, yep. I'm looking at it now.
And it's like... about as simple as you can get.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a Pong controller when you really think about it.
Mm.
Because although it's like one controls up and down movement, the other controls left and right, and then the other knob is like you can change the direction of the ball with it or something.
Oh.
I remember the AVGN episode. He was like messing around when they were playing tennis or whatever.
And he was just like making it purposely miss.
Yeah, it's one of those controllers though that's like there's no easy like convenient way to hold it
Mm-hmm.
because it's like it's a box.
Yep.
I guess it's supposed to be set on a table, but who plays video games in front of a table unless you're playing like the Virtual Boy or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What you've learned is not comfortable.
No. But yeah, it's probably the most simple controller ever. The controllers are built into the system, I believe.
Yeah. So it's not like, and you can't go that far from the system.
No. Well, it's funny. The system itself has really short controller cables,
Yeah.
but the TV hookup cord is like stupidly long.
Yeah.
So it's one of those more interesting things.
Yeah.
And then we kind of, after that, you get into this. So controllers were they didn't really, during this era, you didn't really get standalone controllers so much.
Yeah.
They were more built into whatever system, and you might sometimes get like a slider that comes out and it's like it's a knob. Because
Yep.
most systems were Pong systems, and all you got was a knob.
Yeah. You did have the occasional weird keypad though.
Or the keypad.
Yep.
The keypad is something that will kind of stick around for a bit and then
Yeah.
disappear.
And what was like funny about these two is that like where they were a part of the system, if you were playing it, you'd literally have to hover around the system, like right next to each other, because they're not that big.
Yeah,
So
you'd have to
really-
huddle together to play. Sometimes you'd get like little detachable ones that didn't go far, but you could at
Yeah.
least hold it something. And we didn't really get an official game controller until the 2600,
Yes.
which is probably the definition of video game controller to most people.
Yeah.
Because it is literally, as Scott the Woz would say, a stick with a rod
Yep.
and one red button.
Yep.
And you know what's funny? It's intended to be held as in the table's flat on the surface and you hold the joystick in one
Yeah.
hand and you press the button. But most people I know, they hold the system in the palm of their hands and then they kind of grip the joystick with like two fingers
Yep.
and press the button. It is fascinating how like it's just kind of evolved to that.
Yeah.
And I guess it's like the most simple controller ever made.
Yeah.
It's literally a button and a knob.
And it's kind of funny too because when you look at the Atari 2600 controller, and then you look at a lot of those plug and plays that we talked about, a lot of them were just a button or maybe like a couple buttons and then a little joystick controller. So
it's like the definitive, like when people think video game controller, they think the Atari joystick.
Yeah.
And then we got to the fucking weird era.
Yeah.
Well, first there was the Magnavox Odyssey 2,
Yeah.
which basically just had a Atari-style joystick, only instead of a rod, it just had this little, like, stick twig thing.
Yep.
And one big square button.
Oh boy.
And then we get to then we get to the Atari 5200, I'd say.
Yep.
And the 5200, it's not in your picture, but
No.
essentially the 5200 was one of the most ridiculously over-designed controllers ever made.
It was the one that looked like a phone. right?
Well,
It had
all
a
these.
joystick and a
Okay.
keypad. Yeah.
So it had a joystick at the top. It was like it looked like a phone you had in your hand.
Mhm.
You had a full-on keypad, and then there was two sets of buttons on each
On the
side
sides, yep.
near the top, like for Atari games. Like,
Yeah.
this was the most unnecessarily overcomplicated controller, and it was unique because the analog stick was actually like analog,
Oh,
like
okay.
the joystick, so it actually could go anywhere.
Yeah.
The problem was though it didn't recenter itself. So it would kind of
Oh.
just flop to the side
Oh no.
because of how it wasn't designed with like a spring. It had these like rubber pads at the bottom,
Yep.
and they broke so easily.
Oh no.
And then
Then like things like the Intellivision and
Yeah, then we get the-
ColecoVision.
Intellivision and ColecoVision, which were the phone controllers.
Yep.
The Intellivision was like you had the digital keypad.
Yep.
There was two buttons on the side.
Yep.
And then it had this weird like disc thing that was like
Yeah.
you could press in like multiple directions, and it was also a button itself.
Huh.
I remember it being super stiff
Yeah.
from the one time I held one. And then the ColecoVision was similar, as in it was also a giant phone-looking thing with a keypad.
Yeah.
It still had two buttons on the side, but instead of a disc, it had this like joystick thing at the top that was
Yeah.
similarly stiff, but probably more comfortable than whatever the hell the Intellivision thing had.
And with these remotes that with these phone-like remotes with the keypads, they did sometimes have like overlays that would go over them. So
They
like
were damn essential for a lot of games because half the time
Yeah.
you'd have to like just press every button to figure out
pressing
what the hell the thing did.
Yeah. I wonder how expensive those like overlays are nowadays like,
It's-
to have them.
It's hard to say because Atari stuff is kind of worthless.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to say.
There's another one that's kind of like it too. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's in this picture, the Emerson Arcadia.
So there was a ton of old systems from back in the day.
Yeah.
There was the Arcadia. Oh, there was the one of my favorites is the Fairchild Channel F,
Yep.
which its controller was, as another Scott the Woz quote, was referred to as a Snicker bar,
Oh, nice.
and it was basically you held it in your hand, and it had like a joystick at the top that you could move in the four directions. You could twist it and turn it. And you could push it and pull it out.
Yep.
for
Like
different-
Bop It. It was
Yeah,
basically the
kinda.
Bop It of controller.
And it was okay. It was different. There was also like one that was like a gun. It looked like a gun like grip.
Oh.
Like it had a trigger, and then the top was like a joystick that you could twist and turn. It was interesting. I forget what system that was for.
Yeah.
Might have been the Bally Midway Arcade.
This
thing.
is a little off topic, but remember that console that was like it was like a almost pyramid shaped, and it had a racing wheel on
Oh.
one side. It had like regular controls.
The
and, like, a
Coleco
gun.
Telstar Arcade.
Yes, that was something, and it had triangle cartridges too.
Yeah, that was. So we're not going to get into every single
Oh,
controller
yeah, yeah.
ever designed, but I'm thinking of like some
That
of the
just came in
iconic
my
ones.
head when you said it. Kind of looked like almost like a gun, like because I don't
Yeah.
know why that just came. Because I remember the gun on that was so realistic looking on the
Yeah.
on the Coleco one.
Well, there was also the Odyssey, which had a fucking rifle.
Yeah.
But we're getting into like Well, actually, could honestly do another alternative controller.
We could,
thing
probably.
at some point. But it's getting back to that. So now we get to the probably the more iconic era of controllers,
Yeah.
where we have the NES,
The rectangle phase.
which was the NES is fascinating because it is one of the most important controllers in history.
Yep.
Because it introduced to us to the D-pad,
Yes.
which was actually lifted from a Game & Watch device,
Huh.
and it was the creation of Gunpei Yokoi.
Yep.
And it was basically designed to get around the whole button. It was because you needed to be able to move in like all four directions easily enough
Yep.
without a joystick, because it was a portable device. So it was designed so you could have it on the thumb, and you could move back and forth and up and down. And essentially, all a D-pad is it's a ball pivot
Yep.
with a piece of plastic on top of said ball pivot.
Mhm.
And then it can pivot and there's four buttons below the four directions, so it pivots on the ball pit
Huh.
into the directions. That's how you get that smooth analog movement.
Yeah.
The thing is, though, Nintendo actually owns the original copy, the patent to the D-pad, because they patented it.
Oh.
We'll get to how other companies got around it later.
Yeah.
And the NES controller is super comfortable, super clicky buttons. Honestly, the only downside is the corners of the controller kind of dig into you after a
Yeah.
while.
They definitely are not the
But it's-
softest of edges.
No, but it's like part of gaming history to like
Oh,
hold
yeah.
an NES controller.
And then you could see like the controllers that followed it
So
followed
the
a very similar pattern.
The Master System controller is essentially the same thing, only it's lacking a start and select.
Yep.
The buttons are a bit more mushy.
Yeah.
And the D-pad is, rather than a cross, it is a plus because they had to, obviously they couldn't use the cross style.
Yeah, it looks like it's a square in this one. Like it's just a big square.
Yeah, it's a big square that it works, but it's not great.
It's not the greatest.
Now, Atari's comeback system for the time was the 7800. Now, the 7800 is fascinating.
What the heck is...
So, what you're looking at there, people can't see. She's looking at some reference controllers. The 7800 had two controllers. There was the European and Japanese version, which looked like a NES Master System controller. It had a D-pad, which some versions have this weird analog stick thing stuck on them, and others it's just a D-pad.
Yep.
And then two buttons. It's actually a really comfortable looking controller. I don't have one currently, but I'd like to hunt one down.
Yep.
And then the American system had, imagine this 5200 controller.
Yep.
Minus two of the side buttons and the phone, the number pad.
Oh, okay.
So it's like you hold it and it's like a joystick. It's so stupid. Like no, I don't get why they went with that.
Yeah.
So because the European controller is just infinitely better.
So much better.
And you kind of like there was other systems in the background, but controllers had basically kind of like established that this was the future moving on.
Yeah.
Because no one was going to go back to like a joystick. Or a number pad.
Yep.
And then following that, we had Sega came onto the market with the Genesis controller, which is amusing. Because the Genesis controller, a lot of people forget how fucking huge it is.
Yeah, it's big.
It is really big, and pictures don't do it justice.
No.
But what's funny is you look at a Genesis controller and you actually kind of realize it has the same amount of buttons as an NES controller.
Yeah, no.
When you actually look at it, because
1, 2, 3, 4.
They both have four buttons each.
Yep.
The thing is, the Genesis rearranges it's differently. It has 3 action buttons and then a start button.
Yeah.
And the Genesis controller is super comfortable. Like, it fits great in the hands.
It's nice and it has nice round edges that are more comfortable than hard, sharper plastic.
It looks like a kidney bean.
It does. But it's also interesting because the shape of it ends up kind of being what influences a lot of controllers in the future. Kind of is what we have right now.
Yes. But another fun fact is the Genesis's D-pad is one of the best D-pads ever made.
Oh,
but
really?
what's interesting is how they got around the Nintendo's patent.
Yeah.
So Nintendo's patent was specifically for the ball pivot with the plastic piece on top and the buttons below. The way that Sega got around this is they had the same exact design, the buttons on the bottom and the cross, only rather than putting the ball pivot into the controller, the ball pivot was directly attached to the D-pad.
Oh.
Works exactly the same, but it gets around the patent because it's not technically the same thing.
Nice.
And that's how their controller was designed. And their controller was cool because it was a D-pad, but it also had the circular edges.
Yep.
Really smooth to feel.
Yep.
And then after that, the next console was the TurboGrafx 16 or PC Engine.
Yes.
And this controller was essentially an NES controller.
Yeah.
2 buttons, D-pad, start select.
Yep.
But its significant feature was it had turbo buttons built in.
Oh.
So you could have turbo switches and stuff.
Oh, are those like little...
Yep, those are the turbo switches, so you could do turbo or slow.
That's cool.
Yeah, and it was, and then...
And it kind of took the NES design, but also it gave it more softer edges, so probably a little more comfortable in your hands. I've never held it, but...
Yeah, and it also had kind of a big chunky...
Big chunky TurboGrafx.
Yeah, TurboGrafx insignia right in the middle.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we also get... There was... So, we'll skip that one for now.
Oh, okay.
And then, of course, the iconic Super Nintendo controller, which is the standard controller layout.
Yeah.
Was the first time this appeared, with the 4 buttons on one side,
Yep.
the D-pad on the other,
Yep.
and the 2 start select, and the first introduction of triggers.
Yep. Oh, yep.
On the top.
Yep.
The shoulder buttons, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because, ironically, Nintendo created this style.
Yep.
But they wouldn't use it again until the Wii Classic controller, what we'll get to later.
Huh.
But yeah, one of the most iconic controller designs. And interestingly enough, this controller had a lot of advantages over the Genesis controller in a lot of ways.
Yep.
because it had 6 buttons for fighting games. The Genesis only had 3.
Huh.
And you need 6 buttons for most fighting games.
Yeah.
Now, in contrast, like as a in retaliation to this, the Genesis released out their 6-button controller, which I don't think is on that list, but no, that's a Saturn.
Oh.
A 6-button controller.
Oh, for the Genesis?
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
Which was essentially, it was the same, it was a little bit tinier, like it was more squeezed. Oh, here it is.
Oh,
It was a bit
okay.
more, like, they kind of went more with the kidney shape beam. They moved the
Yep.
start button over and they added another row of buttons. And
Yep.
this, like, mode button on the top, which some games used.
Yep.
One of the definitive fighting game controllers of all time.
Huh.
Because it's perfect layout.
Yep.
Now we can get over to that, the Neo Geo
Geo.
controller.
Which, it's kind of funny because earlier I heard you say, well, everyone got rid of the joystick.
Well, no,
And
here's
then-
here's the thing.
Yep.
The Neo Geo controller, you're looking at one incarnation of it.
Oh, okay.
That is the AES controller, because the Neo Geo was literally an arcade machine.
Yep.
It was the same hardware as its arcade counterpart,
Oh, that's...
the MVS and AES.
Yep.
That came with, because the Neo Geo was the premium system at the time, because it was
Ah.
basically the same as the arcade,
The Neo Geo was the one that had the giant boxes, right?
giant cartridges,
Yep.
and its controller was literally an arcade like fight stick.
Yeah.
Now,
I guess that makes more sense now that I'm looking at it, that it was like
here's
an
the thing
arcade.
though. Its CD counterpart, the Neo Geo CD, which was the same console but only took CDs instead,
Mm-hmm.
had a traditional controller, which looked like this.
Oh.
And it was essentially a regular shaped kidney bean style controller. It had 4 face buttons similar to Super Nintendo, and then it had this weird, like, it wasn't an analog stick, but it like kind of clicked around like an analog stick, kind of similar to, I guess, like the NES Max like controller.
It was kind of like a precursor to the traditional.
Yeah, sort of like an analog stick,
Yeah.
but it wasn't quite, because it kind of clicked into place.
Oh yeah, but kind of maybe like the first steps into that.
Yeah, like it was solid, and this was kind of around the point where you'd get a ton of alternative controllers.
Yep.
And then, because like one of the next controllers we got there was the 3DO controller,
Yes.
and 3DO's controller is weird because it's like the bastard child of a Super Nintendo and a Genesis controller, because it's shaped like a Super Nintendo controller,
Yeah.
has the shoulder buttons,
Mhm.
but then it only has 3 face buttons,
Yeah.
which makes it a bizarre controller for fighting games. To the point where there's actually like thousands of alternative 3DO controllers, including this one Capcom like fight controller, which is like super awkwardly shaped.
Well, and then one thing though that was interesting at the time too, wasn't it that a lot of the controllers had the same like controller plug, so a lot of them
So
could
some of
bounce
them
around
did.
from because
The-
I know you could do that with Atari
Yes.
and the Sega.
So the Genesis controller had the same plugs as the Atari 2600 and the ColecoVision, and I
Yeah.
believe the Atari 7800. So theoretically, you could take a Genesis controller and plug it into an Atari 2600, which is the way I recommend playing 2600, and it works. Like,
Yeah.
everything it works exactly as you'd think, and it also works with the ColecoVision too.
Yep.
And it's funny, just fascinating,
Mm.
because
Can't do that today.
no, well, PC technically you can play PlayStation and Xbox controllers.
Oh yeah.
But yeah. So then there was the 3DO controller, and it's funny because 3DO controllers were all different depending on which model you had, but they were all sort of the same.
Yep.
And then the Jaguar controller.
Yeah.
And what's funny is the one that it's showing you there is the
Is
Pro,
the Pro one? Yeah.
but the Jaguar controller was amusing because it brought back the freaking number pad.
Keypad.
And but aside from that, it was more of a standard Genesis style, like 3 buttons,
Yeah.
D-pad. No shoulder buttons on the original model. There was
But on the Turbo
the
model.
Pro model. It
yeah.
had 6 buttons and 2 shoulder buttons, plus the number pad.
Plus the number pad, and from all the games that we played on the Jaguar the other time, we didn't use the keypad at all.
No.
We attempted to with like one of the games, thinking maybe it would work, but it did not do anything.
I know in some games you could use it for save states or stuff, or
Oh.
saving. And then following the Jaguar controller, now we get to one of the more iconic controllers of all time, which was, well, technically, I guess the Saturn controller came first.
Yeah.
And the Saturn controller is fascinating because there's two different versions of it.
Oh, okay.
Well, actually, three if we're going to get super into it. But so the Sega Saturn controller initially in the US had a completely different design than the one that's most well known.
Oh, that's interesting.
So the original design was like this chunky looking thing
Ugh.
that like had this really awkward D-pad, these giant shoulder buttons
Yeah,
that they just kind of clicked. They didn't really feel like a press.
Yeah.
And it was super awkward compared to the Japanese version, which was this smooth kidney bean design with proper buttons on top and a nice D-pad and like full on
Yeah.
shape. So people actually complained about the original design, so they actually took the second design and released it later on because it was more popular.
That's good.
And then there was also the Saturn's 3D controller,
Oh, okay.
which was released afterwards,
Oh.
which included an analog stick, a D-pad, all 6 buttons, and then a start button. And it is actually a surprisingly comfortable controller.
It looks big, but it does look like it would be comfy.
Now, it obviously wasn't the first analog stick, but it had an interesting one because it was like this big bubble thing
Yeah.
that you kind of like move around.
Put your thumb in.
And it was somewhat comfortable.
Hmm.
But then moving on back to, stepping back a little bit, we also had the PlayStation controller. Now, the
Yes.
PlayStation controller is fascinating too, because if you look closely at the PlayStation controller, it is basically a Super Nintendo controller.
Yeah.
Because obviously the PlayStation started life as the SNES CD.
Yep.
And it's funny because, like, literally the button layout, the D-pad, the analog stick placement, it's literally the same controller as Super Nintendo.
Yeah. Even
Only
the
with-
color coding.
Oh yeah,
The
even
gray.
only with grips.
Yep.
It was also the first controller not to use the traditional AB lettering.
Yep.
It was the first to incorporate its own unique setup, which included
Square, triangle, circle, and X.
Yep. It's a PlayStation thing.
Yep.
And the D-pad, which was notably segmented,
Yes.
but it's actually one solid piece.
Oh.
And what's funny is because of how it's designed with the plastic piece going under the control shell,
Yep.
that gets around the freaking pad.
That's smart. That's pretty innovative.
It also had 2 sets of analog sticks up top.
Yep.
And it was later, well, not analog, bumpers up top.
Yep.
And it was later updated with the analog version, which included 2 additional analog sticks down below.
Yep.
Which is which was known as the famous DualShock.
Yep. And it's kind of, once it added the analog stick, they kind of never really
Well,
changed.
we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So then, going on, and then we get to Alex's favorite controller of all time.
Ugh.
So here's one of the most controversial controllers, in my opinion, I think ever made.
The worst.
The Nintendo 64 controller.
Worst.
Okay, shut your bias for me. The N64 controller is interesting because it was literally
The worst.
designed to be like experimental in every way. It was the first system to use an official analog stick,
Yep.
and it also had it had a D-pad on one side, two triggers up top, and then it had this odd. So it only had an A and a B button, and then it had these set of C buttons, which were
Yes.
used for camera control most of the time.
Mm.
And then it also had a trigger on the back. And the whole idea with the controller was you could hold it in 3 different styles.
Yep.
The rare normal style where the D-pad was prominent. There was the analog style where you'd hold the middle prong because it was a 3-prong controller.
Yep.
The middle prong and then the side prong.
Yep.
And then there was the rare games that held the analog stick and the D-pad side.
Yep.
I'm trying to think of what games those were, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head.
Mm.
It is such an odd controller just from a design standpoint. It also incorporated Rumble for the first time with the Rumble Pack
Yep.
add-on because it had a slot on the back where you could plug in additional like add-ons. It also could be used for memory cards
Oh, okay.
in the transfer pack for Pokemon Stadium.
Yep. Nice.
And walking it back a little bit, we actually forgot about one of the most infamous consoles of all time.
The Philips
The
CDI.
Philips CDI. And it's wide.
Spoon!
Yeah, it's wide. It had the Philips CDI had 4 truly iconic controllers.
Yeah.
There was the most common was the remote style one, which was like a TV remote, but it had like an analog stick at the top and a couple buttons.
Yep.
Fine for point and clicks, but not really anything else.
Yeah.
There was one that literally looks just like a spoon.
Yep.
It's got like a button in the middle and two side buttons. I don't get it.
Yep. Smooth.
And then there was two other ones. One that looked like a Genesis controller, and it was probably the most well known.
Yeah.
And then there's one that looked like a Super Nintendo controller, but
This
it had
one?
like this really, yeah, and it had this really obnoxious like analog
Yeah, that
stick
looks-
in the D-pad, which made it impossible to use properly.
It looks like this one is broken. Like it's not. It's missing the thingy.
Or they broke it off because
They
it's
broke it
so
off
useless.
because it was so annoying.
Yeah, the CDI was bad. Oh, and then we forgot to talk about our friend the Virtual Boy.
Oh yeah.
One of
that-
the most, in my opinion, underappreciated Nintendo controllers because it is obscenely comfortable.
That control. Yeah, I just played it today, and I will say, that was so comfortable in my hands.
Oh
like,
yeah,
the design
because the
of
grips
that.
were well molded for hands, and then it was interesting because it was the only controller I can think of that had two D-pads.
Yeah.
Because the whole idea was we didn't really know how to for 3D gaming.
Mhm.
So one kind of like odd how to control things in a 3D space. Too bad it never utilized them properly, but
No. Oh, and I will say the triggers on the Virtual Boy were so satisfying.
they're so-
to press.
punchy.
Yeah.
It was also the first of like 3 Nintendo controllers that look like that are shaped like M's.
Yes.
That the N64 controller one that we'll get to later. So I mean, other than that, I'm thinking of other systems at the time. There was also. So we talked about the PlayStation.
Yep.
We talked about the Saturn and the N64. I guess now we move on to the Dreamcast.
Yes.
Actually, well, maybe not. Actually, I'm trying to think. Was there any other things before we get to Dreamcast?
No, I think that's pretty much. I mean,
I mean, there was
there's
more.
one. There's one right here that's showing.
Oh, actually,
the Bandai
the
Apple Pippin.
actually, I kind of do want to talk about the Bandai Pippin.
Yeah.
So obviously, the reason why Apple is not in the console market now because of their failed console from the 90s. It actually is a kind of cool controller. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, it's very almost like it looks Xboxy to me.
It does. It's also
Yeah.
it looks like a boomerang,
It does.
and it had a D-pad, 4 buttons, and then a trackball.
Yeah.
Because Apple.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'd love to find a Pippin, but they're so expensive, and honestly, the game library is garbage.
Yeah.
The only interesting game I'd want to play on the Pippin is like Marathon, which is an old first-person shooter made by Bungie.
Yep.
But I'm pretty sure you can find that elsewhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, that.
But it is interesting, like the little roller ball in the middle, the D-pad,
Hmm.
and then it also was one of the first to do like rainbow buttons, like because that ended up being because
Well,
the Xbox
not
ended up-
really, because
No?
the original Super Famicom controller
Oh.
had rainbow buttons, and the Saturn also had rainbow
yeah,
buttons
I forgot.
in Japan.
Yeah.
For some reason, the Americans don't like rainbows.
Americans
I guess.
don't like rainbows, I guess.
Like Japan thinks we don't like rainbows. So.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
and
we
even the
do.
PlayStation controller had the colorful buttons.
Yeah, but it was grayscale, you know.
But yeah, but I wanted to kind of cut it there because before we get to the modern stuff, so we're gonna take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Woo!
And we're back.
We're back. Woo. Woo.
So, continuing on, before we get to like more modern controllers, I guess you could say there was a few more obscure ones. Now, obviously we're kind of going all over the place, but we're just kind of controllers are really bizarre and fascinating.
Yes.
So, another interesting one that I actually just thought of was there was the Commodore for years. There was
Yes.
also they had a famous system called the Amiga CD32.
Oh. Okay.
Which had a bizarre controller.
That's it's like a controller, but it's reversed.
It's kind of so it looks like a standard controller. It has 4 buttons on one side of D-pad, but it's like a U shape. So there's like
yeah.
a slot like at the
So,
top.
like, take the Genesis controller, but turn it around. Like, flip it around so the bean shape
it's
is
more-
the opposite way.
It's more kind of like if you took the Neo Geo CD controller and just kind of took a cut out of the top of it.
Yeah.
I've never held one, so I have no idea if it's
I
any.
feel like that would be so strange.
Well, I mean, the CD32 is a strange system in general.
Yeah.
But yeah, moving on to that. Also, we kind of mentioned it previously, but controllers had vastly different colors depending on region sometimes.
Yeah.
Like the Saturn had like 3 different variations.
Yep.
Like my personal favorite is the Japanese Saturn because it was a white controller with rainbow buttons and like red triggers.
Yep.
There was also the V Saturn, which had like a gray color with blue buttons, and the American one was just straight up jet black.
Yeah.
The Super Nintendo controller was it was like gray with like rainbow buttons.
Rainbow buttons.
In Japan, and they also didn't have
Yep.
concaves.
Yep.
Yeah, like they were all rounded.
Yeah.
The American version decided purple,
Yeah.
and like some of them were concave rather than convex. And it was just weird how like they changed colors depending on regions. I mean,
Yeah.
hell, the original Famicom had like these red and gold controllers that were the same as the NES controller, though they were just differently colored. Although one had a microphone built into it
Oh, interesting.
that you could use in Zelda.
Yep. Huh. Oh, like the flute or the.
No, you could use it to kill certain enemies in game by yelling at them.
Oh. The power of yelling. Interesting.
But moving on now we get to like what I consider like the modern era of controllers.
Yes.
Like really the first 2 systems I consider like the modern era of controllers are like the PlayStation DualShock and the N64.
Mm-hmm.
Just that like full like grips, like beefy like design.
Yep.
Because then we move on to like the Dreamcast, which was the next major controller and Sega's final
Yep.
major controller.
Sega Swan Song.
So the Dreamcast controller is interesting because I like it, but I also dislike it in certain ways.
Yeah. There's things I like about it, but then there's also things I don't like. Especially, isn't one like how the cord comes out?
No, that's
I'm not a huge fan of that.
that's subjective because the cord does come out of the bottom,
Yeah.
and some people aren't fan of that. I don't care personally, but it did introduce a few things, particularly the VMU screen, which the VMUs were memory cards that kind of also doubled as Tamagotchis.
Yeah.
And you could plug them into the Dreamcast 2 memory card slots.
Mm-hmm.
And you would get a little LCD screen on your controller, which you could use it for certain games. If they would give you info depending on the game, or like sport games in particular, you could use to like hide your plays.
Oh.
And then it also had a second port, which could be used for like say the Rumble Pack or the C-Man microphone, yeah, or other things like that, or just a second memory VMU.
Yeah.
And then its other big feature was triggers,
Yes.
which was something that the Saturn 3, because the Dreamcast controller is basically a evolution of the Saturn 3D controller,
Yes.
because it had these analog triggers, which were great for racers.
Mm-hmm.
And then it had 4 face buttons.
Yep.
And then its weakest feature, though, unfortunately, was its analog stick, because it was hard plastic and
Yeah.
kind of slippery.
It is big. It is like compared like to the size, like it's a big.
Yeah. I mean, it's about the size. It's like a PlayStation one, only it's not comfy.
Yeah. I think I remember when I was playing with it. After a while, it was like, ow, ow.
You get used to it after a while, because the controller is more comfortable than it looks.
Yep.
But then moving on, we get the DualShock 2,
Yes.
which is identical to the DualShock 1,
One.
except it's black,
Yep.
and it has pressure-sensitive buttons.
Huh.
I don't know what games ever use that,
Yep.
but they're there.
And they really didn't really change that much.
Well, I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yep. And
So then we get to the GameCube controller now, which is...
yes.
So the GameCube controller is one of the most acclaimed controllers of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because it's literally like they just did not give a shit and threw the kitchen sink at it. So it's basically you get your main analog stick up in the corner.
Yep.
It was so it wasn't so when I think of analog setups, in my opinion, it was the first one to use the traditional analog setup of one left analog stick high, D-pad below, right analog stick low, and then buttons.
Yep.
It's basically because the PlayStation style is both analog sticks low,
Yep.
buttons up top.
Yep.
The more common is the left is high, right is low.
Yep.
And then the GameCube's most notable feature was its button layout, which took the main button that was used the most was A, so A was the biggest.
Yep.
B was slightly smaller and put down lower, and then X and Y were up above.
Yep.
It's kind of a mess how it looks, but it works when you figure it out.
Yeah.
And then there was two.
It also is kind of reminiscent, like the design kind of reminds me of the Virtual Boy controller a little bit.
It's got the same M shape.
Yeah, it has that M shape, but it also, looking at it, it looks like it's comfortable to hold.
It is. It is a very comfortable controller. It's got two beefy triggers, which are partially analog.
Yep.
And then it has a Z button, the most forgotten button on that controller. And it's still to this day a critically acclaimed controller. Like Smash Brothers enthusiasts like live by that controller.
Live by the GameCube.
And then obviously moving on from there, well, we get the Xbox controller. And oh boy, the Xbox controller.
This thing is ugly.
The Duke.
This thing is
the
so
Duke.
big and like...
Okay.
Ugh.
So the Xbox controller originally released with this massive gargantuan beast of a controller.
Yeah.
And it is one of the most bizarre controllers ever made.
Yeah.
It has unofficially been jokingly named the Duke. For how freaking huge it is.
Yeah.
Because the whole idea was big hands, Americans, big use. They like big things.
Yeah.
And it's so awkward.
It's big.
Because, okay, so what's funny about the Xbox controller is it actually borrows a lot from the Dreamcast controller.
Yeah, no, looking at it, it definitely does.
So it uses similar to the GameCube, it uses the analog stick layout.
Yep.
What's weird, though, is one of them is bigger than the other, and one is more concave, and the buttons are all kind of awkwardly... They're not like perfectly straight.
Yeah.
They're kind of angled.
Yep.
There's two additional buttons which replace... Basically, the Xbox doesn't have bumpers. It only has triggers.
Yep.
So those two buttons act as like replacements for the bumpers.
Oh.
And then its D-pad is the weirdest thing I've ever
Is
seen.
that the D-pad?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
It was... It makes more sense when you hold one, but it's not a great D-pad at all.
It looks like it's just like a circle. And then you just kind of have
It
to
is-
use
well,
it as a D-pad.
It's shaped. You kind of have to you gotta hold one to understand.
Yeah.
And it is very, very bulky.
The Duke.
Yeah, the Duke. You know what's funny though? The Duke was so popular.
Is this the updated one?
No, that's still the Duke.
Oh, that's still the Duke. So there's multiple versions of the Duke, or is this...
No, it's the same controller.
Oh, it just looks different.
Well, here's the fun fact: the Duke was so popular, has gained like such a popular like.
Mm-hmm.
It's gained such a popular reputation in modern times that
Yep.
it was actually the company Hyperkin actually made a re-release of it that works on Xbox One and PC.
Oh, that's funny.
No, this was the updated controller.
Oh, and
So-
that's more similar to their next...
Well, we'll get to that eventually.
Yeah.
So the thing with the controller S was it was actually the controller that was designed for the Japanese market. Because,
Oh.
smaller hands.
Yep.
So it's actually a much better molded controller. The buttons are properly laid out.
Yeah.
They move the white and black buttons, which are the replacement triggers,
Yep.
down below.
Mhm.
The analog sticks are identical.
Yep.
The D-pad is more... It's still not good, but it's more normal.
Yeah.
And also the Xbox controller had memory card slots in it,
Oh, interesting.
similar to the Dreamcast.
Yep.
Although it had a built-in hard drive, so you never used them.
Yeah.
And so the Duke is funny as just a... haha, this controller is hilarious.
A relic of time.
But the controller S is the way to go.
Yep.
And following that, because the next generation, we were followed, actually Xbox was the first out.
Yeah, Xbox 360.
Now the 360 controller essentially is an evolution of the controller S.
Yep.
It smooths out all the edges. It gets rid of the white and black buttons and moves
Yeah.
them up as proper like triggers or bumpers, I guess you could say.
Yep.
No more analog controllers. Wireless controllers were starting to become a thing because
Mm-hmm.
this was after like the GameCube Wavebird controller, which was the first like real radio wave controller.
Yep.
But yeah, so we had this. The only downside, so the 360 controller is one of the greatest controllers ever made, but it
Yeah.
has one major Achilles heel.
Oh, okay.
Its D-pad is the worst D-pad ever made.
Oh, no.
It is a hunk of garbage.
Yeah.
Like it.
It doesn't look like it would be bad, but I guess
No,
it's
but
like when...
it doesn't feel like a D-pad because it doesn't use the
Oh.
ball pivot because I think it was still patented.
Oh, okay.
It like moves like an analog stick. It's
Oh.
weird. Like, and you constantly are like clicking like diagonally because it doesn't work right.
Yep.
It's not a great D-pad. And if you're a fan of fighting games, it's a nightmare.
It's not good for
Or
fighting
2D
games.
platformers.
Yeah.
Really anything that involves like D-pad movement.
Yep.
And then following that, we get the DualShock
Please.
3.
Which is essentially
The same
the
controller.
same controller, except
Although
now
it-
wireless.
Well, no, it's a little different.
Yep.
So it's wireless now. They've gotten rid of the button that turns off the analog sticks,
Oh,
and they
okay.
replaced it with the home button, which
Oh, like the PlayStation one.
so that's the home button. It returns it basically to home.
Yep.
Now, ironically, originally the PlayStation 3 was supposed to have a much different controller.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was like this boomerang looking thing.
Oh, no.
And
I'm
it-
glad they didn't
Yeah,
do
actually, let
that.
me find a picture of it because it's ridiculous looking.
I'm really glad they didn't do that now.
No, everyone complained because it looks stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like a weird. If you look
Almost like the Apple one?
no
The
worse
Bandai Pippin? Oh,
worse
wow.
than that. The
Wow.
Pippin at least looks normal.
Yeah. Huh.
trying to find it.
It's looking at Bitmoji.
Oh yeah, here it is. That was going to be the original PlayStation 3
Oh,
controller.
no. Okay.
It's like a massive.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie. It's not a boomerang. It's a boomerang. Because it has... Those just look like it has boobs. Like, it's a boomerang with little boobs.
I want to know what happened to this thing. To be
It
honest,
looks really weird. Like, that looks very, like...
yeah. Look up.
boob. Yeah, I don't know why. Like, it looks like those are arms and those are someone.
Look
That's
up the
just what it looks
PS3 like the PS3 beta controller. It
Yeah.
is such a bizarre.
It looks...
I kind of wish that they'd release this as just a joke controller one day.
Yeah.
See if anyone would pick it up. Because, oh god, it's so weird looking.
I'm really glad they kept their design. Wow, that would have been horrible.
Now go. Okay, so the PS3 controller was originally released as the 6-axis
Yep.
because they had a lawsuit involving Rumble at the time.
Oh.
But the PS3 controller does have a few differences.
Yep.
It features obviously the 6-axis motion controlling.
Yep.
And then it has actual triggers on the back. Instead of the L2 and R2 being buttons, they were made like analog triggers that actually
Oh, nice.
moved. They're kind of slippery. They're not the greatest, but
Oh.
it's something. And then it was later re-released as the proper DualShock 3 after they solved the analog lawsuit.
Nice.
And then following that, we get one of the most
Iconic.
iconic controllers of modern time, and also probably one of the most infamous controllers of modern time.
Yep.
The Wiimote.
The Wiimote.
One of the most, probably greatest selling ideas.
Yeah.
But at the same time, oh man, did it restrict that console in a lot of ways?
Oh, yeah.
Because so many developers, I swear, were like trying to like figure out ways to like utilize that damn thing.
Yeah. Well, one of the main methods would be to turn your Wiimote to the side so you could use the D-pad as well as the like.
So
one and
you'd have
two.
certain games that would use it like as a remote style.
Yep.
You'd have other games which you'd hold sideways and play it like an NES controller.
Yep.
Then you also had the nunchuck, which would plug into it, and you could that was basically it gave you an analog stick.
Yeah.
And it works. There's nothing wrong with the
Yeah.
Wiimote. And eventually we did get the Wii Classic controller,
Yep.
which there was two versions. The first was the original Classic controller, which looks like a Super Nintendo controller with two analog sticks.
Yep.
And that one was okay.
Yep.
But that was later updated with the Pro controller, which added grips,
Yep.
repositioned the top trigger buttons, and put the analog sticks farther apart.
Yeah.
Just a better controller overall.
Yeah. It looks a lot more comfortable to hold too.
Oh yeah. And then, so now after that, this era was kind of...
There was kind of a longer period between.
Well, yeah, the Gen 8 lasted for quite some time.
Yeah.
And then we get to the Wii U.
Yes, which was the pad.
So the Wii U had two major controllers.
Yes.
There was the original Wii U controller, which was this massive tablet-looking thing,
So yeah.
which... It's big, it's bulky,
Yep.
but it's not actually that bad.
Yeah.
And then there was my preferred Wii U controller,
Which was
the Pro controller,
Yep.
which this is also a bizarre. No, that's not the
Oh.
Wii Pro.
Oh.
This was the Wii U Pro controller.
Oh, this one.
Yes.
Yes.
So the Wii U Pro controller is essentially, it's an Xbox 360 controller, only the analog sticks are so it's like a reverse of Sony style.
Yeah,
both,
the analog sticks are on the top.
Both analog sticks are on top.
Yeah.
And the buttons are down below.
Yep.
And honestly, after using it, it's not bad. It's a little doofy, I'll say.
It takes getting used to.
Damn thing holds a charge like nothing though. Like
Oh, really?
the Wii U gamepad could barely hold a day's worth of charge.
But the controller could hold months.
Mine probably still has battery power. I haven't touched it in like months. But yeah, so that was the Wii.
Yep.
Then we move. Oh, actually, we didn't talk about that GameCube controller.
What GameCube controller?
The keyboard.
Oh.
So going back, there was actually a GameCube controller that Alex wanted me to talk about.
It popped up on this picture I found.
So the game Phantasy Star Online,
Mm-hmm.
an MMO, you needed a keyboard because it was originally a Dreamcast game where you could use the Dreamcast keyboard.
Yep.
And it was never released outside of Japan. But Japan, they made a special custom controller that is literally, it's a keyboard with two GameCube, like it's like you cut a GameCube controller in half and stick a keyboard in the center.
It's so stupid looking.
I want to find one of those because that's fucking amazing.
I just can't imagine holding that. Like, you'd have to hold your arms out like a good distance.
I guess you could use it separately with another controller.
Okay, that's
but it was
good.
so doofy.
That's so silly.
But anyways, moving back on now. Now we get back to modern stuff. So after the Wii U, we get the PlayStation 4 DualShock 4.
Yep.
Sony finally updated their controller.
Yep.
And honestly, it was for the better.
Yeah.
So essentially, the DualShock 4 just kind of updates the look of the... it's basically, it takes the idea, bigger grips, farther apart analog sticks.
Yep.
They fixed up the buttons a bit. They made the triggers a bit more like easy to grip, not you won't slip off as easily.
Mm-hmm.
They made the analog sticks concave.
Yep.
And then they added a touchpad.
Yeah.
It was also the death of start and select.
Yep.
Now we just have the options button.
Yep. And share.
Yeah, share for people who use that. But the analogs, the touchpad is somewhat useful. It's also a button itself.
Oh, okay.
Although, this was also the weird. So I swear to God, people act like always see reports about DualShock 4 controllers being like super fragile and stuff, and I always see these pictures of like them destroyed, and I'm like, I see that and I'm like, what the fuck are you doing to your controllers?
What did you do to your controller?
Like, are they like beating the shit out of them?
Throwing them?
Yeah, because I've had mine for like years and I've never had shit like this.
No.
And then you move on after that to the Xbox One controller, which is basically
the same.
It looks like a 360 controller, but it looks cheaper at the same time.
Yeah.
But also better in some aspects.
Did it fix the D-pad?
Yes.
Okay.
So they just kind of changed the D-pad into tilt switches, which just work better.
You know what I think makes it look cheaper? The X, Y, A, and B buttons. I feel like because it's just like a black with like the color is the letter. I don't know. I just feel like having the full color button just made it look. I don't know.
It's also the fact that it looks plasticier.
Yeah, it does more plastic. I will say.
But it's a good, solid controller.
Yeah.
I'd never buy an Xbox One for one, but...
Yeah.
And then now we get to... So the Wii U failed, if you hadn't heard.
Yeah. It was a big old failure.
And so Nintendo replaced it with the Switch in 2017.
Yep.
And the Switch has a wide variety of controller options.
Yes.
So obviously the Switch's main gimmick is it is both a console and a handheld at once.
Yep.
So the whole idea is you can take the grips off, called the Joy-Cons.
Yep.
And use those as a controller as well.
Yep.
So there's two options. You can either pull the Joy-Cons off and just hold them in your hands.
Yeah, and they have those like little things that's attached to
Yes.
it that basically have like the Wii wristband thing, so it can stay attached to your wrist.
And that works fine. And then there's also what has been called, I guess
Joy-Cons.
I guess this is the official controller in a lot of ways. I call it the dog face controller.
Because that's what it looks like to me.
It looks like a dog to me.
It looks like a dog.
It's not a bad controller. It's kind of small for my taste, and
I feel like I find my hand whenever I use it, my hands cramp.
Yeah, and the analog sticks are kind of small because it's the Joy-Con ones.
Yeah.
Thankfully, Nintendo offered an alternative, which, in my opinion, is one of the greatest controllers ever made.
Yep.
The Wii Switch, the Wii, yeah.
The Wii.
The Nintendo Switch Pro controller.
Yep.
This thing is the epitome of perfection.
Yeah.
Perfect D-pad, two amazing analog sticks,
Yep.
solid buttons, solid triggers. just solid design.
Yeah, just
Super good weight, HD rumble,
Yep.
semi-motion controls.
Yep.
Perfection. That is until Sony released their next controller.
Yep.
The DualSense.
DualSense. I don't even think
It's
on
probably not
here.
even on there.
Nope. It's not on there. But I know which one it is. It's the white one, right?
Yes. So, the PlayStation DualSense.
Ah, there it is.
Essentially, it is an update of the DualShock 4.
Yeah.
Same basic design, you know, the same buttons, same iconic D-pad, analog sticks, home button, touchpad.
Yep.
But it also includes HD rumble
Yep.
and new haptic feedback. Like there's like resistance in like the triggers and stuff now,
Mhm.
and it's just such a solid hunk of controller.
Yeah.
Like this thing is rock solid, and
Yeah.
I fucking love it. And then, I guess to wrap it up, then we also have the Xbox Series X controller, which I believe is identical to the Xbox One controller.
Yep.
I've never held one though, so I don't know for sure.
Yeah, there could be some things about it that maybe you don't know, but from your opinion, from the visual opinion, it's identical.
It looks about the same. It might have better internals,
Mhm.
but honestly, the DualSense is so good.
Yeah.
We kind of rambled on for a little bit there.
And you could buy a DualSense controller. You can't buy the console to go with it, but you could definitely find the controller.
Yeah, they're
in
finally
stores
coming
if
in
you
different-
just want to hold it.
They're finally coming in different colors too.
Whoa! Oh wow!
Although I like the white. The white is
The way it
Good
does
look.
look very sleek. Like it looks very modern and
it's so comfortable too.
yeah.
No, it's that my two go-to controllers now are that of the Pro controller, the Switch Pro controller.
Yeah.
They're just both so freaking rock solid.
Yeah.
Other than that, like I'm thinking of other favorites. I mean, I always had a soft spot for 2D games. I love the Saturn controller.
Yeah.
I have a super soft spot for the Saturn controller. I love the Dreamcast controller.
Yep.
Obviously, any PlayStation controller. I think guilty pleasure controller. I love the Atari Jaguar controller for how just goofy it is.
It is very comfortable. Like when we played it, my hands get very crampy very easily because I'm like constantly on my computer typing at work, and I really enjoyed that. I didn't get super crampy with it.
Oh yeah, it's just a overall solidly designed controller.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of my least favorite. I know she hates the N64 controller. It's hard for me to say because, I mean, I guess maybe like some of the old like keypad controllers or like joystick controllers.
Oh
I
yeah,
was
like
never,
the Atari 5200.
Well, I've never held one of those officially, so I can't really say it. I didn't like the 7800 controller the one time I held one.
Yeah.
I just thought it was stupid.
Yeah.
I'll admit the Sega Master System controller is pretty lame.
Yeah.
Because, well, fun fact, the Sega Master System and Genesis have the same controller board, so you can just use a Genesis controller.
Nice.
It's just better.
Yeah.
Yeah, but other than that... Oh, wait, we didn't talk about the PlayStation Move controller.
Oh, yeah.
It's
horrible design.
it doesn't look like
It's
a game controller.
unfortunate design.
I mean, it still works good.
Yeah. I mean, it works good, but it's unfortunate.
There's also all the arcade fight sticks that you can get nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
There's a ton of options for all sorts of things.
Yeah. Well, that's what's kind of neat, too. Well, that's what's kind of neat about modern controllers, too, is that there's also, like, the personalization element to it. You can get, because at least with the Switch controls, you can get Animal Crossing themed ones, like
all the different
Zelda
color
ones.
options.
Like, there's so many different options. Like, it's kind of really nice, you
Yeah.
know? Cause, and same with the Joy-Cons. There's a whole bunch of different options for those, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Well, that was a pretty interesting retrospective.
Yeah, no, it was interesting to look back on them, and especially, I'm so happy, but also horrified that this thing exists.
I want to find one of those.
I really want to find one too. You know what kills me though? I think I saw that when I was in Japan.
Oh, you probably did. They're everywhere in Japan.
I feel like I totally saw that when I was in Japan, and I wish I bought it for you, from hilarity's sake.
Well, no, you got me the Japanese Saturn controller, which I
Yes.
prefer immensely.
But that would have just been hilarious if I came back with that. I said, "Here you go, here's a keyboard."
I would have laughed because I've been like, yes, I love
Yes.
this fucking thing.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, guys, once again, thanks for joining us on this disaster of a conversation.
Nah. This was a good good one. This was a good one.
Rambled on while exhausted about controllers.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting actually to look back because it is really funny to see how some of them like changed quite a lot.
Oh yeah.
Like especially Nintendo was super experimental. Well, PlayStation, well, not they mostly kept it the same.
There's an amazing image I've seen where it shows all the Xbox controllers and it goes change is good.
Yep.
It shows the PlayStation controllers and it says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And then it just shows all of Nintendo's controllers. It just says cocaine.
Yes. And I think that's very accurate.
Yeah. They had... Nintendo's always trying to innovate, if for better or for worse.
For better or for worse.
A lot of times better, but sometimes... Yeah.
Sometimes you get the N64. There, I said it.
Yeah.
It sucks. Boo!
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, anyways, once again, thank you for joining us on the Gaming and Collecting...
Burpcast.
Podcast.
It's the Burpcast now because Bill just burped.
You can find us on... We are made on Anchor Podcast, and you can find us on all your major podcasting platforms, such as Apple Podcast and Spotify.
Woo.
And you can also follow us on both Instagram and Twitter, along with Good Pods. And the episode will eventually be out on YouTube, probably whenever I get to it.
Yep.
And until then, guys, thank you for joining us as we discuss the games that shaped us. We will see you all next time.
Woo!
Here, we'll see you all later.
See you later.
Bye.